You know, when you hear Industrial Revolution, you probably picture steam engines, smokestacks, maybe some factories. But what if I told you that's missing the point? This wasn't just a series of new gadgets. It was the single biggest break in the entire human story, a total rupture from everything that came before. I mean, think about it. For 99% of our history, life was pretty much a zero-sum game. The idea of sustained economic growth, it was basically impossible. Then, all of a sudden, in what's really a blink of an eye in geological time, the fundamental rules of the game just changed. One person's lifetime saw more change than the 1,000 years before it. So what was this ancient trap we were in? And how in the world did we finally get out? To really get what the revolution did, we first have to understand the prison it broke us out of. For thousands and thousands of years, all of humanity was caught in what historians call the ancient organic trap, and it was basically a relentless treadmill of survival. See, before about 1750, every society on Earth, no matter where, was an organic economy. And what that means is that all usable energy came from just one source, the sun's energy captured by plants each year. That's it. Food for us, food for our animals, wood for heat, and for industry, it all came from the land, and only from the land. And this created a really brutal problem, something called the photosynthetic constraint. Land was literally everything. So let's say you wanted to produce more iron. Well, you needed more charcoal for that, which meant you had to cut down more forests. But wait, that's less land for farming, which you need to feed a growing population. You couldn't have more industry and more people. It was a trade-off. Any gain in one area meant a loss somewhere else. This is the famous Malthusian trap. Anytime population grew, it just ate up any surplus and pushed society right back to the edge of survival. So how did we get out? How did we break free? Well, we found a loophole, a massive one. We stopped just looking at the surface of the Earth for our energy, and we started digging. We unlocked this incredible hidden world, a subterranean forest that had been storing millions of years of sunlight. We found coal. And just look at this shift. It is staggering. In 1800, almost all of the world's energy came from biomass. You know, wood, plants, muscle power. A single century later, coal makes up half of all global energy. This was a complete paradigm shift. Humanity went from relying on the annual flow of solar energy to suddenly tapping into this massive stock of ancient stored energy buried right under our feet. Now, this new energy needed a new kind of engine. Back in 1760, steam power was tiny, totally insignificant compared to good old-fashioned water wheels. But by 1870, it had absolutely exploded, growing from just 5,000 horsepower to over 2 million. And here's why that was such a game changer. A water wheel has to be on a river. It's stuck there. But a steam engine? You could build one anywhere. A completely uncoupled industry from geography. Suddenly, you could build massive factories right in the middle of cities, right where the workers were. And if you look at the raw data, you can see the complete takeover. Steam goes from being just about 6% of Britain's power to over 98% in roughly 150 years. This wasn't just another option. It became the power source. It was the new beating heart of this industrial world. But okay, this is where it gets really personal. This new energy, these new machines, they didn't just change the economy. They reached into the most intimate parts of our lives. They completely rewired how we think about work, how we think about time, even how we think about ourselves. Basically, the clock replaced the sun. Before the factory, all work was task-oriented. A farmer worked according to the sun and the seasons. A weaver worked until the cloth was done. Work and life were all mixed together. But in the factory, time itself became the product. You weren't paid for finishing a task. You were paid for selling hours of your life. And this created this brand new, rigid separation. There was work time, which belonged to your boss, and then there was your time. And this created some huge cultural conflicts. A great example is this battle over Saint Monday. Traditionally, artisans and craftsmen took it easy on Mondays, maybe recovering from the weekend. But factory owners, they couldn't have their hugely expensive steam engines just sitting there idle. So they fought for years to stamp out this tradition, and they eventually offered a deal. Give us your Monday, work reliably, and we'll give you Saturday afternoon off. And, believe it or not, that's the origin of the modern weekend. So, how do you get an entire society to adopt this new discipline? Well, you have to teach it from childhood. I mean, think about it. The school day, with its bells ringing, its rigid timetables, the focus on being on time, it's the perfect training ground. People have argued that its hidden curriculum was basically to get kids ready for a life ruled by the factory whistle. And of course, this change wasn't accepted quietly. Take the Luddites, for instance. We have this popular image of them as just being anti-technology, right? Smashing machines for no reason. But that's not really the story. They were highly skilled workers, and they were fighting against a system that was destroying their craft, their livelihood, and their autonomy. It was sort of like collective bargaining by riot. And you know what? Their resistance was completely understandable. Because for the first few generations, this new world was absolutely brutal. There was this period of intense hardship and suffering, a time that economic historians call Engel's pause. So the economy was growing like crazy, but the benefits were just not being shared. For something like 70 years, real wages for the average worker were basically flat. All that new wealth was flowing to the owners of the factories. Meanwhile, cities were just exploding without any planning, creating these overcrowded slums with no sanitation, which were just ravaged by diseases like cholera. But if you want the single most powerful biological piece of evidence, look at this. Average height is a fantastic indicator of a population's overall nutrition. And in the early 19th century, at the very height of Britain's economic boom, the average person was actually getting shorter. GDP was going up, but the biological standard of living was literally going backward. But then, after decades of this trauma, around the 1840s and 50s, something incredible started to happen. The system, after all that pain, finally started to pay off for everyone. The Great Enrichment began. Between 1850 and 1900, real wages for the average worker just skyrocketed. We're talking about their purchasing power literally doubling in just 50 years. The immense productivity of this new industrial system was finally starting to be shared more widely. And this kicked off the world's first mass consumer revolution. Things that were once luxuries became everyday necessities. Tea and sugar, which were a great source of cheap calories, became staples. Cheap, washable cotton clothing dramatically improved hygiene. For the very first time, working-class families could actually afford things like meat and dairy, and even basic household goods like clocks and furniture. So this really brings us to the core takeaway of this whole story. The Industrial Revolution had two totally distinct phases. First, you had this long period of trauma, of hardship and stagnant wages for the masses, and that was followed by a period of absolutely unprecedented enrichment and rising living standards for pretty much everyone. And the legacy of that two-part story is all around us. Seriously, it's not just in museums. It structures the very rhythm of your life today. That feeling you have of work time versus your time, the whole structure of a 9-to-5 workday, the very concept of the weekend, none of this is natural. It's all a social construct, a compromise that was forged in the fires of the 19th century, a hard-won battle between the demands of capital and the basic needs of human beings. But for all its trauma, we can't forget its ultimate achievement. For the first time in human history, the population could grow exponentially while the standard of living also rose. It completely smashed that Malthusian trap forever. And it created the single greatest engine for lifting people out of poverty that the world has ever known. So we're left with this profound trade-off, aren't we? The revolution freed us from the tyranny of the soil, from the constant threat of starvation. But in exchange, it put us under the new discipline of the clock. It gave us wealth and comfort that our ancestors couldn't even have dreamed of. But it makes you wonder, what did we lose in the process? What parts of ourselves did we have to leave behind?